Hi everyone, this is Rachel back with the Shades of Orange. Today I want to talk about some science fiction and fantasy. I have a good variety as always. All that being said, let's get started. First, I want to talk about Escaping Exodus by Nicky Drayden, which hopefully that title sounds familiar because this book was included in my best science fiction and fantasy that I read in 2019, and I'm finally getting around to giving you a proper review of it. This book came out of nowhere for me. I had not heard much about it. I hadn't seen any other reviews, but it was available on Scribd when I had a subscription, and if you do want to support me, you can definitely go and use my link to get 2 free months of Scribd. It gives me a free month and helps me to keep my budget on books as tight as possible. But going back to the book itself, this is a diverse space opera set in a future where people have left Earth and are now roaming the galaxy, and in order to survive, they have found that there are these giant space creatures that they're able to hunt down and make homes inside of these beasts. And they do so by manipulating and changing things in their organs in order to accommodate them. And the story itself is absolutely fascinating. It's told from a couple of perspectives, one being a royalty or someone who has a lot of political power in this world, and she is next in line to rule. And she has this affair or this love interest who is this woman that actually works on the beast, and so she's considered to be a much lower class. And the story somewhat revolves around the romantic relationship, but the story very much goes on from there and moves on to some larger plot points. Within the story, we follow the two perspectives, getting to see how their lives differ from the beginning of the story when they have this romance and then what it evolves into. I love the story for so many reasons. First, it is just incredibly diverse. You have this beautiful queer relationship between these two women, but beyond that, you get to see different relationship structures because in the society, they're trying to control the population. And so they create family units where there are multiple females for one male, and they only allow one child in that relationship. And so you get to see how that affects things. And I also want to mention that the society is matriarchal, and I like the way that the author addressed that. So often, these kind of books are just touted as being overly feminist because women are ruling. And I like the fact that the author actually acknowledges the inequality towards men and how to be truly feminist and to really support women's roles as well as men's, you need equality. And along those gender divides, you also get to see class divisions, which I really appreciate because again, you get to see someone who is at the top of this society and someone who is at the bottom, and to get to see how they are treated differently, how they have different opportunities, how their voices are heard or not heard accordingly. And I just love this story. This book is filled with politics, specifically court politics, which is not normally my thing. In fact, this whole book just doesn't sound like the kind of thing I would normally enjoy, but I loved it. It was just so different. It is very relationship focused, as you can probably tell from my review, which isn't normally something you're hearing a lot about on my channel, but for whatever reason, these relationships just drew me in. I found myself cheering for them. I was interested to see what was going to happen. And beyond that, you also get this really interesting backstory where you get to see this beautiful world building where there are these giant creatures, and it is a bit gruesome in places. It's not horror by any means, but it is a little bit gross the way that they manipulate the creature to accommodate them. And with that, you get to see how they are possibly hurting these creatures, and you get into a lot of really interesting life issues that really go into the fact of whether or not these creatures are sentient. Do they have rights of their own? Are they just things to be used by humans because we have authority over them? And I just loved every minute of it. This book does get really weird, and it's probably not going to be for everyone, but it definitely was for me. There was some weird sex scenes, there was some alien tentacles, and it's gonna weird some people out, but if you like your horror with a bit of weird, this one might be right up your alley because I just loved it. And I do want to mention that this book does have a very similar premise to a Cameron Hurley space opera. However, while that book did not work for me, this one definitely did. So if you're wanting that queer, female-driven space opera that is diverse with a little bit of gross out, moments in it, this is the one to read. It is so underhyped and I just want more people to read it because I loved it. I have not read anything by Nicky Drayden before, but I'm definitely going to change that. I have my eye on both of her previous novels and I would love recommendations for anyone who has read those, which one I should pick up next, because I am dying to get my hands on more of her work and hopefully those will become favorites for 2020. Next, I want to talk about Save Game by Joseph Sale, and this is actually one that I requested from the author because the premise sounded so good. This is about a boy who has to go and compete in this video game in order to win prize money to hopefully save his father that needs a very expensive surgery. This story definitely gave me potential vibes of Ready Player One, and with the virtual technology in this book, I do think that those comparisons are fair, but at the same time, it's very much a different story. Now, this book just jumps right into the action. Right from the first page, you are thrown into the story. And with that, you don't get a lot of time spent on character development or plot development, and you're just given a really fast story. I would have liked to see more character development in this one, but what this book was pretty much what I was looking for, and that was a geeky, fun adventure story. So part of this book takes place in the real world. You get to see this main character as he is interacting with his family, visiting his father and his girlfriend, and you get to see his life on the outside. But then my favorite chapters were easily the ones inside the game, and you get to see him fighting monsters, trying to get additional keys and win the game. And that's the part that made it very Ready Player One. I found those chapters to be the most immersive. The world building in those were just great. I could really picture the game and it felt like a very real game that could exist in our world today. And you can tell that the author has a big love of all things geeky. There are tons of gaming references as well as just other nerdy references to Dungeons and Dragons and all that good stuff. And the author apparently actually has a podcast called The Mind Flayer where he talks about all these geeky things. So if you're interested, you could check out that as well. So this is one I would recommend to anyone who enjoys that kind of geeky storytelling. It's very much a book for gamers. If you don't like games, if you look down upon people who play games, steer clear of this book. It's not for you. There is a lot of like gamer talk and bro talk, which I did find a little bit annoying at times, but I also find gaming talk just annoying in general. So I think it was authentic, even if it was a little bit grating to read at times. And it was just a really fun story. I flew through it very quickly because it is quite short. And again, there just isn't a lot of layers to the story, but the fact that the main character is fighting for the health of his father does give the book a little bit more emotional depth, and it was just a fun read. So if you think that this sounds up your alley, I would recommend it to the right audience. Now, switching over to fantasy, I also read 5 Dragons by Pamela. This is a collection of 5 interconnected short stories that are about, well, as you can probably guess, dragons. And I really enjoyed this collection. If you recognize that author's name, that's because I've read some of her work before, and they actually made some honorable mentions in my 2019 Best of the Year videos. And this is her newest one. And when I say interconnected, I truly mean interconnected. In these stories, you get to see kind of 5 perspectives or 5 pieces of an interlocking story. So in the first story, it starts with the dragons discovering that some of their eggs from their hatchery have gone missing, and so the dragons, along with their human caretakers, go off to search for them. And the beginning of the story definitely feels very classic in terms of the fantasy tropes. But I've read Pamela before, and I know that she is not one to play it safe, and sure enough, within this collection, she takes some of these stories to places of newer technology. She brings in this Western setting, which I love, and the story just evolves into something quite different. And so for so many fantasy fans, I constantly hear them complaining that while they love fantasy, they find it hard to find fantasy stories about dragons, and especially fantasy stories that actually feature the dragons that they talk about. So if you are one of those people, this is the collection for you. These are the kind of dragons that are those highly intelligent kind, so something more like in The Hobbit as opposed to the Game of Thrones dragons. I tend to prefer the dragons that don't talk. I like more the ferocious beasts, But regardless of that, I still very much enjoyed these monsters because they were still very ferocious in the ways that they interacted with the humans. And I just overall really enjoyed this one. I do tend to prefer science fiction over fantasy, which is the only reason that I think I still prefer her other collection, which I talked about last year. But regardless, this one was so much fun, a solid 4 stars from me, and I would definitely recommend it to anyone who needs more dragons in their life, and frankly, who doesn't? Finally, I want to talk about a novella, and that is Prospector's Demon by K.J. Parker. And this is from Tor.com. I was lucky enough to receive a digital copy for review. And this was actually one of my most anticipated releases for 2020. So I was very excited to get a hold of it because this book is about an exorcist that is willing to do anything in order to get the demons out of his victims. From the premise, I really thought this could be a favorite. I love dark fantasy stories that bring in elements of horror, and you know that I especially love possession stories. However, this one just didn't work for me, and I will say that from the synopsis, I don't think that it really fits what the story was actually about, because it's very literary in nature, which I don't mind. I do appreciate the fact that the writing in this was very good, but my issue is that there was very little plot in this book. And while I can appreciate good writing, a good literary story, I still need a story in and of itself, and I just felt like you didn't get that. The main character is very unlikable, and that is done on purpose. I don't have a problem with that, but most of the story is just an inner monologue of the main character explaining the possession of these demons and how it works, which was semi-interesting, but eventually I just wanted to get onto the main event. So overall, a big disappointment just because I don't think that this book delivered the story that I was promised. So that is it for this quick round of science fiction and fantasy reads. I would love to know if you're planning on picking up any of the books I mentioned. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please recommend me your favorite dragon fantasy books, as well as your favorite stories that feature virtual reality. Besides Ready Player One, because everyone knows that one. I would love some new recommendations. Thank you so much for watching. I will talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.